and willing enough and persistent enough to improve on those gifts. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we have a gentleman and a family that has done that since they were put on this earth. Tonight I'm very pleased to have General David Petraeus with us. So with that, the question I'm going to ask, which is, he has not privy to this, is we know about General David Petraeus. Oh, there she is, Holly. Everybody say hi to Holly.
Experienced the traffic from
That was the president that was coming in. Well, speaking last, she read the book, and she told me it's a great book, Tom, it's a great read. And just wait till you get the last chapter, and it's somewhat scary for what we have to be involved with. But what I was about to say was that instead of reading everything, what I like the first question to be to General Petraeus is, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, starting from 5th grade? Now, that doesn't mean college, that means 5th grade. So, and take your time. We have several hours tonight. With that, we'll start with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the microphone. My voice is, after all of the stuff that we've done and just traveling around the world, literally got back on late Saturday night, is finally beginning to give out on me. But I think the microphone can make it all possible. I was born in the Hudson River Valley, 7 miles from our alma mater. Corey and I went to West Point. Several others in here did as well, I know. Met Holly there, daughter of the superintendent. It was a blind date. I was horrified to find out that she was the soup's daughter. She was horrified to find out that no one had met me. And, you know, I found that what we prized at West Point, which was a combination of, if you will, brains, leadership ability, and physical ability, those three really in particular. I enjoyed exercising all those, and I realized that I had some God-given talents in each of those, and found out that if I worked pretty hard, I could do pretty well. And I believe that life is a competitive endeavor. You don't get a t-shirt just for showing up in the real world. You really do have to compete to try to be the best you can be, and also the best team player that you can be as well. And I sought to do that over the years. I enjoyed the variety that the Army provided. I was an infantry officer. I loved being under a rucksack, jumping out of planes, and doing all the rest of that. But I also enjoyed the opportunity that the Army gave me to go to graduate school, and I know there's at least one other fellow graduate of the Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs here at Princeton here with us this evening. I was very fortunate to do that and to be able to finish a PhD. I taught international relations and economics. You know, when you get tired of academia, you go back to the field. When you get tired of being under a rucksack for a period of time, you do something else. And the Army allowed you to do that. And I found it very, very fulfilling, rewarding. We did move 23 times in 37 years of service. And the final 10 years, I was gone for at least 7 of those, I think, between a year in Bosnia, 4 years in Iraq, a year in Afghanistan, and then gone constantly as a Central Command commander as well. But we feel very privileged to have had that, all of that, and then to follow that with being director of the CIA, the best job in government. Again, truly blessed in many, many ways. And then, frankly, to be, everybody should be a partner at KKR once in his life. Especially when the company grows from 83 billion to 550 billion. It's been an incredible journey. And it has been intellectually stimulating, it's been rewarding, fulfilling, exciting. So, you know, there you have a lot more than just 5th grade on. But in so many ways, so very, very fortunate, and also at various times lucky. But the truth is that luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. And I tried very, very hard to be prepared for what came along at various points, and I'd like to think that I was reasonably prepared for those, and we were able to make the most of those opportunities.
That's fantastic. So I guess the question would be, why the book and why now?
Well, the book came about because Andrew Roberts, my co-author, who I knew very, very well and for whom I had enormous respect, he's one of the world's greatest biographers and historians. We actually worked together many times. I interviewed him a bunch of times on the stage of the New York Historical Society 5, in fact. Just on his Churchill book, I'm a huge Churchill admirer, and I found various aspects of that very, very, very interesting and intriguing. He interviewed me at various festivals and places in London. He's a quintessential Brit. He's delightful. He's incredibly productive. He's brilliant. He has wonderful recall. You'll see through the book all these beautiful little recollections that he has. And what's really remarkable about him is that his memory is not affected at all by alcohol. And I think it was a typical Brit. It's, Churchill at his finest. I, on the other hand, can never have a drink before speaking. I will certainly after speaking. In fact, having spent 7 years under General Order Number 1, for those of you in the audience who remember that, that means you're in countries where you do not drink. And so some of us have been trying to make up for that ever since. But Andrew called up. He said, look, I've never done a book with a co-author before. This would be my 20th book. There needs to be a book that provides the military historical context for the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Would you be interested in doing it? And I jumped at the chance. I'd been looking for an opportunity to write about Iraq and Afghanistan, but without doing it in some kind of tell-all memoir. I had some incredible offers to do that, but that didn't appeal to me. And also I wanted to revisit Vietnam, which is the subject of my PhD dissertation, but at the 10-year mark from when the war ended. And now we have many decades since with a lot of additional scholarship and memoirs and also declassification of papers. So I was very intrigued by the idea, jumped at the chance. We then went to various publishers. We used his agent. There was a nice bidding war for the book, which is terrific because this is how he makes his living. We agreed we'd donate the proceeds to veterans organizations. And then the publisher finally who won it, HarperCollins, asked, well, how do you intend to divvy up the labor here? You have one guy who's written 19 books and another guy who, I was a speechwriter for a number of people and I wrote a dissertation and so forth, but again, I've never published a book. And Andrew quickly answered, he said, well, General Petraeus is going to write about the countries that he's invaded. and Vietnam, and I'll fill in the rest. It actually was a very active collaboration back and forth. It turned out that I know a reasonable amount of some of the other wars that we covered actually was either part of those as well or a very close observer of them. And so it was a delightful collaboration. I wish he could have been here because he's also, again, a delightful guy on stage, especially after he's had a couple of drinks, which again doesn't seem to affect his memory at all, but makes him more humorous.
That's great. I know that you have a continuous theme through the book about getting the big picture right and then implementing it, etc. Could you talk a little bit about that before we go to the details?
Takeaway from the book is about strategic leadership, and in the introduction we lay out an intellectual construct for strategic leadership that I actually used. I developed it when I was between the 3- and 4-star tours in Iraq, during which we also did the counterinsurgency field manual and overhauled all aspect of our preparation of our forces, our equipment, units, leaders, soldiers for deployment to Iraq and Afghanistan. And it holds 4 tasks that a strategic leader has to perform correctly for his organization or her organization to succeed. You have to understand the context in a very granular, rigorous, nuanced manner and get the big ideas right. You have to get the right strategy. You have to understand your forces, the enemy forces, the physical terrain, the human terrain, the neighborhood, all of this, and craft the right approach, the right strategy. You have to communicate that effectively throughout the breadth and depth of the organization and everyone who has a stake in the outcome. You have to oversee the implementation of the big ideas. That involves the energy you provide, the example, the inspiration. It's hiring great people and keeping them. It's allowing those not measuring up to move on to something else. It's the metrics that you use. They have to be the right metrics. And you have to determine how you're going to spend your time. Your battle rhythm is crucially important because the way you drive a campaign plan, the execution, is all these endless meetings, visits, seeing it for yourself. All of the rest of this is really critical. And then there's a fourth task that is often overlooked, and that is where you sit down and determine how you need to refine the big ideas as the situation evolves so that you can do it again and again and again. If you don't do that fourth task, you end up like Kodak, which was the leader in film photography and services, but which had 2,000 patents on digital photography, but failed to make that the new big idea early enough, and others got there first. This works in business as well. I'm sure you would recognize these particular tasks of a strategic leader. And keep in mind that, again, the strategic leader is the one at the very top. It can be the President of the United States who makes the fundamental decision. George H.W. Bush about Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait. This will not stand right away at the first meeting. That's a big idea. Military then has to take it, so the military commander has to determine how do we accomplish the task assigned to us by the president. Everyone, actually, any leader performs these four tasks or whatever organization he or she is leading. The difference is that the person at the very top, the theater commander, Iraq, Afghanistan, what have you, has to get that first one right, or all the rest of it doesn't matter. You could be the greatest communicator, be the most inspirational leader, get everything else right in terms of the implementation, even sit down here and determine how you need to refine it, but if you don't get it right up front, the overall endeavor is basically doomed. And we write about cases in the book where this was done really well. Again, the Gulf War would be an example of that. General Schwarzkopf, helped by General Powell in the Pentagon. In that case, the big idea is build a huge coalition and then double it, and then pound the enemy for 43 days from the air, and then do a hook that just traps them and destroy them. That was a war sent from central casting for the U.S. Army and Marine Corps in particular. We literally train in the desert, out in the Mojave Desert, in the case of the United States Army, Fort Irwin, 29 Palms for the Marines. And then there's some cases where we did not get it right for a very long period of time. Vietnam, it was not until 1968 that we finally got the kind of campaign that was necessary, a comprehensive civil military counterinsurgency campaign that joined up all the elements of the U.S. and coalition military units, the various civilian enterprises, the CIA activities, Phoenix program and so forth, and the Vietnamese themselves. Prior to that, our strategy was one of attrition, search and destroy operations, and a terrible metric, the enemy body count. That doesn't mean you don't need to kill the enemy in combat, you do. But it can't be the overriding objective if the real task should be security of the population. The Marines got it right, by the way, and I know there's a couple of Marines or Marine parents in here. They had a program that General Westmoreland did not like because it was not going out with big units pursuing the enemy in the jungle. But keep in mind, we engaged the enemy and then we just left and they filled back in behind us. what was particularly interesting in that regard was rereading some of the books that I'd read, not when I did the dissertation, but in subsequent decades. One in particular, We Were Soldiers, Once and Young. Many of you will have read that and also seen one of the great movies of this period by Lieutenant General Hal Moore. He was the battalion commander of the great 1st Cav Division battalion that was in the Idrang Valley. This was seen as a huge success and a validation of the Army's air mobility concept. And the first time I read it, which was in fact when Gordy and I were both battalion commanders, and actually Hal Moore came to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, home of the 101st Airborne Division Air Assault Air Mobility, and we listened very rapidly. But I was listening with the ears of, again, a battalion commander who was seized with how did the tactics go? What about the individual leadership techniques on the battlefield, the courage, all the rest of this? And I missed his reflection, which said, you know, on reflection, we killed 10 enemy for every one of our soldiers lost. They took dozens of losses. It was a very, very substantial fight. And he said General Westmoreland thought this was a validation of the attrition strategy. But he said, on thinking more about it many years since then, I'm not sure that the American public agreed with that assessment. And he was obviously absolutely right. And by the way, that was a unit that was purpose-built. That was before personal rotation instead of unit rotation kicked in and a variety of other practices that were unwise. So it was fantastic to go back and reread. I'd note that in Afghanistan, we had a brilliant initial campaign toppling the Taliban, eliminating the Al-Qaeda sanctuary, although Osama bin Laden did get away. We caught him 10 years later, in fact, when I was privileged to be the commander in Afghanistan. But it then took us 9 years to get the inputs right for the post-conflict campaign. And by that, I mean not just the right big ideas, the right strategy, although it took us a long time to arrive at that, but the right level of resources, which took even longer, the right organizational architecture. This is not trivial stuff. You've got to have all the components of this overarching strategy. The right preparation of our forces, the right leaders, the right level of diplomats, spies, development workers, rule of law, all of the other elements that are required for a comprehensive civil military counterinsurgency campaign. So it was really interesting to look at each of these conflicts and ask about the quality of the strategic leadership and note when that is lacking, that campaign is not going to succeed. A particularly vivid example was the French in what was then Indochina, as before Vietnam was partitioned and so forth. And the French found it very frustrating that the Vietnamese communists, Viet Minh, would not join them in battle the way they wanted to. They fought as guerrillas. And so they decided, you know what we'll do? We'll create a big, huge base, be way out from Hanoi. And it'll be so attractive that they're finally going to join us in battle. They're going to come and we're just going to take them out. And so they found this location out surrounded by hills. And they said, they'll never get artillery pieces up on those hills, no big deal. It's called Dien Bien Phu. What's particularly interesting, of course, Andrew found a little footnote in history that there were 5 outposts. These were named for the mistresses of the French commander. But of course, the communists did join them in battle, and the French lost, and they had to surrender it. A horrific defeat. Went into captivity. Eventually, there's a peace agreement, exchange of prisoners and so forth that results in the partition of North and South Vietnam. But talk about a seriously bad, big idea. And then just finally, there are other cases where in Iraq, again, a very impressive campaign to topple Saddam's regime. But then, frankly, our post-conflict planning was very inadequate. The first organization assigned to do it, actually, the Secretary of Defense fired them, replaced them with something called the Coalition Provisional Authority, made up of a number of very good people, but most of them rotating every 3 months. It was a revolving door, and 2 terrible big ideas right up front. Literally within days of the arrival of this senior official, the ambassador running the CPA, and these were to fire the Iraqi army without telling them how we're going to enable them to provide for their families. So you've taken hundreds of thousands of trained soldiers with weapons and created an incentive to oppose the new Iraq rather than to support it. And then we compounded that by firing the Ba'ath Party all the way down to level 4. Level 4 is basically the bureaucrats we needed, Western educated, many of them, by the way, have been quite secular. Many of them drank, in fact. I mean, what more could you want in a local partner in a Muslim country? We fired tens of thousands of those who needed help run a country that we really didn't understand. It took us years, really, to come back from that. We did eventually establish an embassy, as we should have, about a year and a half into the conflict. Got it on track, had a solid strategy. General Casey built the right organizational structure. But then there was a catastrophic event in February of 2006 that threw the country into a Sunni-Shia civil war. And we had to completely reverse what it was we were doing when we conducted the surge. The surge that mattered most was the surge of ideas, not the surge forces, although it's great having 25 to 30,000 additional forces to implement the new big ideas much more rapidly. So this is, again, I've spent a bit of time on this because this concept of strategic leadership is absolutely central, not just to conflict actually, but really to anything we do. And I'll just end with one quick, say, corporate example of this, because this very much applies in the business world as well. Netflix, one of the really great companies of our time, and Reed Hastings, one of the great strategic leaders, in my view, right up there with Jack Ma and Jeff Bezos and others who built something from the very beginning and enabled it to grow enormously. First big idea, we're going to put movies in the hands of customers without brick and mortar. So we're going to undersell Blockbuster. They do it incredibly well. In fact, Blockbuster goes out of business, except of course for Big Bend, Oregon, which is a famously contrarian place that literally refuses to allow its Blockbuster to die, and now has become a tourist attraction for those of our generation who want to show our kids how much fun it used to be on a Friday night to go to your Blockbuster and browse the aisles and pick out a movie for that weekend. So anyway, the next big idea was he recognized that the context had changed. Broadband speeds were fast enough that you could actually download movies. So that's the new big idea. Third big idea is we're going to create our own content. That was revolutionary, $100 million just on House of Cards alone. That really it just drives the growth of the firm into the stratosphere. Of course, they're going global in year 2. And then the fourth big idea was to produce major motion pictures, real major movies. And they went out and bought not one, but 2 major motion picture studios and did that so well. Great metric. They got more Academy Award nominations 3 years ago than any other major motion picture studio. I've discussed this model with Reed Hastings, by the way. He has one that's very similar to this leadership model that I've described. And I did also share with him that there was one movie that just didn't quite work in my view, and this was where Brad Pitt played General Stan McChrystal. I said, Stan was my longtime buddy. We spent probably 4 years in combat together. I said, Brad Pitt just didn't get Stan McChrystal. He marches around like a little wooden soldier and all this stuff. He has no sense of humor. I said, besides, I just couldn't believe that Brad Pitt didn't hold out to play me.
Rest your voice for a second.